We opened our worship this morning with a great Celtic hymn, Lord of all hopefulness, Lord of all joy, whose trust ever childlike no cares can destroy. Be there at our waking and give us, we pray, your bliss in our hearts, Lord, at the break of the day. The great thing about Celtic theology is that it speaks to us in a very practical, down-to-earth, and what we call incarnational way. Celtic theology was a theology of God being present with us all the time, in the midst of us, and we could never go any place without him. We see that reflected this morning in the 139th Psalm. Now, the scholars among you will say, we're not sure who wrote all the Psalms. They were probably written by several different people. Tradition has always said most of them were attributed to King David. He was a singer of songs. He was able to sing to King Saul in his younger days and comfort his migraine headaches. But I like to think that the psalm that David wrote today, the 139th, was something written when he was running for his life. There was a time when he had actually been anointed as the next king of Israel. We know that Saul had been rejected, but it took a while for that to work out. And so David was a hunted man, and he and his men had to live in caves and hide in holes and hide out in the desert and run from Saul for their lives. And so I'm thinking there are times that David must have thought, where is God in the midst of all this? How do we live and survive, and how do we understand this in our lives? And so I think when David thought about this in his times of reflection, and he thought about it as a man of faith, and he was able to finally say, where can I go from your spirit? And where can I flee from your presence? If I climb up to heaven, you are there. If I make the grave my bed, you are there also. So David, being a man of faith, finally says, there is nowhere I can go and be away from God. There is nowhere I can go and God is not already there. Whether in heaven or hell or wherever it may be, I am with God. That's the thing that some of us tend to forget sometimes, or we lose track of it. And I can't help but believe this past week, a lot of that has gone on around the world. As if we witnessed the tragedy of the Malaysian Flight 17 being shot down, and you realize what the survivors of the families of those people must be going through. How do you explain that? How do you get through something like that? And regardless of what side of the political issue you may be on in Gaza, nevertheless the invasion of the Israeli Defense Forces into the Gaza Strip, and you wonder about people whose homes are destroyed and families are being killed on both sides. And where is God in the midst of that? How do we find that? How do we live with it? And you and I sometimes have lives that there are things that go on and we think God has forgotten us. We've been cut off and abandoned. No, God doesn't care what we're going through. But the writer of the Psalms in King David says, God is with you. It may not seem like it. We may think we're walking in darkness, but the psalmist says to God, darkness is like light. He can see. So how do we walk through this? I think we have two choices. Like David, we can walk with God and believe that God is with us, and there's no place we can go that God is not. Or we can be like Judas. Judas believed he was cut off from God. He believed that he was beyond redemption. He believed that God would not forgive him for his denial of Jesus. And so in a state of lostness, in a state of confusion, he ends his own life. But remember, Peter denied Jesus as well. But he ultimately understood that that does not separate you from God. So we have those days, you and I, when we walk in, it seems like we walk in darkness. We We have those days when it seems like nothing goes right for us. We have those days when it seems like the world is against us and we can't do anything right. It's those days when we don't think anybody loves us or cares about us and we're out there all by ourselves. Those are the times we need to go back to this psalm and believe God is with us wherever we are. If I take the wings of the morning and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea, even there your hand will lead me, and your right hand will hold me fast. Years and years ago, when I helped run a self-help group for parents who had lost children, it became very obvious to us in the early days of that decade of that work that people who came to that group who had lost children, but they came with some sort of faith base in their lives, they found a way to deal with it. It wasn't easy. It took a long time and it hurt, but they were able to deal with it. Those who came to the group who had no place to put their faith, nothing to believe in, did not get through it all that well. So we have to believe that God is with us always. As the Celtic writer of the hymn wrote, God of all hopefulness, be there all the time. Morning, noontime, evening, even at the end of our life, God is there. In the midst of what we go through in our lives, on the darkest days, God is there. And sometimes we have to walk by faith. And we have to say, regardless of what the situation seems like, I have to believe that God is there. In some way, He will lead me through this. I believe this is what David was thinking when he wrote this psalm. I visualize him sitting in the evening somewhere in a desert, surrounded by some of his men, wondering if Saul's forces would fall upon him, wondering if they would have enough food and water to make it through the next few days, wondering if God's promises to him were ever going to come true. And yet he sits there and says, I believe that God is with me, and there's no place I can go where He is not. Jacob this morning finds a place in the desert. He has a vision of God because God is in that place. A place that we might think of desolation, but God is there, and Jacob calls it Bethel. Wherever we are, God is there. Whatever situation we are in, God is there. Darkness, lightness, heaven, hell, despair, joy, God is there. Reach out. Take the hand. Be like David. Be like Jacob. Be like Paul. Let God lead you. Let God know your presence. Trust that He will walk with you through whatever you're going through. And even though it may seem dark, God sees clearly. Even though you may be lost, God knows the way. That's the act of faith that the writer of this psalm is talking about. That's the act of faith that Paul had and Jacob had, and the act of faith that you and I are called to have. Some days it's hard to get out of bed and put one foot in front of the other. But those are the days we have to say to ourselves, I know God is with me, and I can do it. Darkness is not dark to you. The night is as bright as day. Darkness and light to you are both the same. It may seem dark to us. To God it's bright. Our vision may be dimmed. To God it's clear. Let Him lead you.